we're going to continue our series through the Gospel of Matthew called Functional Faith. Now, I've heard you guys have been in Matthew for a little bit. Is that true? Yes, that's right. All right, this is going to be super fun. Now, as you know, just a little bit, as you know, I'm a theology nerd, so that's always what you're going to get from me. We're going to jump into Matthew chapter 13, and it's important for me to set the stage for what's happening in Matthew 13. In Matthew 13, there's a series of clusters of parables that Jesus is going to begin to share. And every one of these parables has in mind a particular theme. And so right off the get, this is the most important thing that we can learn from these parables. The parables are pointing us to the kingdom of heaven. Now, on the count of three, I want everybody to say the kingdom of heaven. 1, 2, 3, kingdom. Okay, you nailed it, exactly. Now, you said kingdom of heaven, but let's be honest, you and I today are a bit disconnected from the context and the concept of a kingdom, right? Any of you roll by on your way in and you saw a castle? No? You didn't see a king and his knights rolling around? No? And I'm just talking about the medieval perspective, right? The idea of kingdom and empire far predates the medieval period. You could look at Persia and the empire of Rome. You could look at the ancient Near Eastern world of Mesopotamia. And so one of the things I want us to do is get a grasp of when we talk about the kingdom of heaven, what are we actually talking about? So all kingdoms have in mind three things, all right? All kingdoms have in mind three things: a king, a people, and a land. Every kingdom. A kingdom needs to have a king, a people, and a land. Now listen, if you have people and you have land, but you have no king, what do you have? Chaos. Chaos is what you have. Just read the book of Job. Read the book of Joshua. And read the book of Judges, and there's no king, and the people did as they pleased. As you jump into Matthew chapter 13, I want to go ahead and start by just reading the text for us. And as Matthew jumps in and he gives us the words of Jesus, what we find is Jesus telling a story, a parable, and the parable is rooted deeply in an agricultural setting. So I want to start by telling you a tale of two curry plants. Now, I'm Indian. Did y'all know that? All right, I'm Indian. So my parents immigrated here from India in the early 80s. And my grandmother has in her home in India, in her garden, a curry plant that she has been cultivating and nourishing for the last 70 years. I am convinced that my grandmother's curries are so unique and so special because of this particular curry plant. My uncle Calvin, some years ago, he ended up going to India and he had a bit of a midlife crisis. And he was like an executive at this oil thing. And he was like, you know what, for my midlife crisis, I'm going to start an Indian restaurant. And so that's what he did. He became a chef. Who would have thought, right? And he produced this store. It's called Palette Indian Kitchen. If you're ever in Houston, go there. It's awesome. Tell him Joey sent you, and you'll get off the menu items. Just trust me. It's going to be the best thing you've ever had. But he was very committed to this restaurant. And so he went all the way to India, and he grabbed tools and utensils and the decor, the whole 9 yards. But the most important thing that he did is he went to my grandmother's garden, and he found that curry plant, and he did this thing called splicing the tree. He spliced the curry plant, and he brought it all the way back over here, legally, just to warn. This could get live streamed. I just don't want to get him in trouble, right? Brought it back over here. And from that one curry plant that came from my grandmother's plant, there were multiple other curry plants that were spliced out. And so when my wife and I first got married, probably one of the biggest challenges that we had is in the area of food and cooking. And I remember our first big kind of marriage spat was my wife made Indian food, and she went to like the local grocery store, and she got Minute Maid curry and Minute Maid rice. That's offensive to me, just so you know. Don't ever do that to an Indian. And it was just, so we're like, all right, okay, what are we gonna do? We've gotta go to my Uncle Calvin, and we've got to curate and grab ourselves one of these curry plants. And so my wife and I, at this point, we have 3 little boys. We jump into the minivan, and we drive all the way to Houston for Thanksgiving. And my uncle carefully splices from that one plant 2 curry plants, and he puts them in 2 separate planters. And those 2 separate planters are placed back in the minivan, and we drive for 11 hours from Houston all the way back to Chicago, which is where we lived at the time. And I want to let you know that these curry plants got destroyed and beat up. One of them was just withered, and it just got kicked and pushed in the whole 9 yards. And there's another one that actually looked much better. And so when we laid it all out, it was like, okay, the one curry plant was just destroyed, but the other one actually looked good. And then in 2 weeks, something wild happened. The one that was all beat up and worked up and worn out started to flourish. It started to recover. But the wild thing about the one that looked good is it didn't change. It didn't get better. It didn't get worse. 2 weeks after that, wildest thing happened. The one curry plant that was all beat up now not only recovered, but new leaves are shooting out of it. New stalks are coming out of it. It is flourishing. The other curry plant that looked like everything was good didn't grow. And now we start to notice a little bit of withering on the outside. Fast forward a month, the curry plant that looked like it was tore up, got into a huge old fight, is now a flourishing, full-on plant, and it is awesome. And the other curry plant has withered. It looked awesome, but in over a month, all the leaves are gone, and one shoot is left. At which point I took a picture and I sent it to my Uncle Calvin, and I was like, hey, what happened with this curry plant? I cannot figure out why the one that looked so good is the one that actually just fell apart. He said, hey, do me a favor and go into the soil of the curry plant and let me know what you find as you dig it out. You wanna know what we found inside of the soil of that curry plant? Barbie dolls, toys, nachos. I mean, just gross stuff. Weeds were all up in there. And then in the other curry plant, about a month afterwards, as it just got better and more beautiful, we had to change it from one planter into a larger planter. And I won't ever forget the rich brown of the soil that was inside of that curry plant that just enabled it to flourish. You see, Jesus in Matthew chapter 13, as he steps in to teach us about the kingdom of heaven, he begins to teach using a parable. And this parable is going to deal with seed and soil. It's going to deal with seed and soil. Now, parables have a particular intention of how they're used. And we need to understand parables for what they are. They're kind of like modern sermon illustrations. And the thing about parables, though, is you want to be careful that you don't expand parables beyond what they're intended. So we want to understand the parable in their own context and what Jesus intended for us to understand about this parable. In a way, when Jesus teaches and uses parables, it's almost like a modern-day riddle. We're trying to figure out, Jesus, what exactly are you up to? So let's read Matthew chapter 13, verses 1 through 9. And I want to just invite you into kind of my process. This is how I read the Bible, and I just ask questions of the text. And this is something that you can easily do when you're reading the Bible. And so it starts off this way: that same day. So right off the bat, I'm kind of wondering, wait a minute, the same day? What happened on this particular day? And then it says, in that same day, Jesus went out of the house and sat by a lake, which, by the way, oceans in the ancient Near Eastern world were images of chaos and destruction. And also, when it says that Jesus sat, rabbis sit and when they sit, they begin to teach. And then it says there's a large crowd that gathers around him, and he gets into a boat and he sits in it, and while all the people stood on the shore, and then he told them many things in parables. And he gets into his very first parable, and it says this: a farmer went out to sow his seed. And as he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path. So here's the first one. And the birds came and ate it up. And some, so here's the second one, fell on rocky places where it did not have much soil. Now, this sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow, but when the sun came up, the plants were scorched and they withered because they had no root. And then we get to the third one. Others, seed fell among the thorns. Now these, they grew up and they choked the plants. And then you get to the fourth kind. Still, other seed fell on good soil, where it produced a crop 160 or 30 times what was sown. And then Jesus ends this kind of brilliantly. Whoever has ears, let them hear. What Jesus does here is he begins to tell a story. And in this story, he has in mind two things. And so it's a little bit of like what Jesus is doing is jujitsu, almost. He's saying, hey, by the way, pay attention to the sower of the seeds. So that's one idea that we need to be thinking of. But then there's an undercurrent as well. What is that undercurrent? Pay attention to the soil in which the seed is being sown into. So the parable of the sower could also be understood as the parable of the soil as well. Now, one of the fascinating things about what Jesus says when he gets into it is that in the ancient world around this time, there were two methods for sowing seed. One of the methods was to plow the soil before you sow the seed. You'd plow the soil and get it all ready, and you're good to go. You sow the seed. The second method, though, is to sow the seed, and after the seed is sown, then you plow it. Now, what does Jesus opt for? He opts for sowing the seed and then dealing with the soil. Now, you might wonder, why does Jesus opt for this method? Here's why he opts for this method. Did you know that the soil is a representation of the condition of the heart of humanity? The seed is a representation of the gospel that is spread out. Did you know that you and I cannot control the soil of another human's heart? We can't. You cannot manipulate another person's soil. You cannot control it. And so what ends up happening sometimes when we think about gospel proclamation is we think, well, we got to deal with their soil first. We got to deal with their heart. We got to manipulate the heart a little bit. We've got to use intellectualism to convince them apologetically. We've got to use emotionalism and hype in order to get them to a vulnerable position, and then they can get the gospel. But notice what Jesus says here. He says, no. What you're actually supposed to do is sow the seed. Sow it far and sow it wide, because you and I cannot control the heart of others' humanity, but you know who does? God. This is actually a weight off of our shoulders. This is actually an encouragement for you to go about the proclamation of the gospel, because the condition of somebody else's heart is not up to you, it's up to God. But what do you have a responsibility for? To partner with the Lord in proclaiming the good news of what Jesus has done in your life. Your job is the proclamation of the gospel. Everything else is in the hands of God. as we jump into this, we find that first principle. We sow wide for a good harvest because we don't know the condition of the soil of a person's heart. This is what Ecclesiastes 11:6 says. It says, sow your seed in the morning, and at evening let your hands not be idle, for you do not know which will succeed, whether this or that, whether both will do equally well. So this is the big first principle, is you and I are called to proclaim the gospel of the kingdom of heaven. Now, remember I said there's a duality to this. On the one hand, there's the seed, but on the second hand, there's the soil. So now we shift to, while you and I cannot control the soil in the other person's heart, guess what we do have a responsibility for? Our own hearts. And so I have a question for you today. What is the condition of the soil of your heart? You see, when Jesus tells this parable, he identifies that not all ground yields good fruit. And he gives us three things. One is the path, the other is the rocky ground, and the third one is among thorns. And I want to walk through each of these. You see, the first one is the path. He says, you've got this seed, and the seed is thrown out. And in the ancient world, you would have had plots of land, which is where you would do your harvest. And there would be paths that as you would walk, because you didn't want to walk in the middle of it because you would mess up the harvest, you would create paths, almost like in squares, all around it. You find this in India and the rice paddies and other places, even modern today. And the path that you end up walking, that soil becomes compact. It becomes tight. It becomes solid. And so some of the seed, as it's thrown out, it falls on this path. Now, what's so fascinating is that Jesus, later on in Matthew 13, he helps us out with this parable, which is awesome, because Jesus himself defines and tells us what each of these conditions actually communicate. And in Matthew 13:9, he says, this seed that falls on this path that is hard and brittle and it's exposed because it can't even get into the soil, this is a reference to the kind of seed that the evil one comes and snatches away before it can even take root. What is the condition of our heart? Are there places where our heart has become stiff, where it's become concrete and tough? I want you to consider how the enemy works in our life. The enemy loves to use different vices and different emotions to harden ourselves so that when the goodness of the gospel is presented to us, it falls on a path and it can't even take root because we have been closed off to the goodness of God. So how does this even work itself out? Here are a couple of ways that the enemy works. The enemy loves to use unforgiveness. Loves unforgiveness because it creates bitterness. The enemy loves to use hatred. The enemy loves to use rage, vengeance, pride, selfish ambition, vain conceit, worldly pleasures. When you and I practice these things, we begin to close our hearts up where we can't even receive the goodness of the gospel. So how do we even open ourselves up to the goodness of the gospel? We have to do a holy exchange. We have to exchange unforgiveness for the incredible gift of forgiveness that Jesus himself modeled to us on the cross. We have to exchange hatred with grace. We have to learn to exchange rage with compassion. We have to learn to not opt into vengeance, but to trust God with his justice. We have to deny pride and go low in humility. We have to refuse selfish ambition and trust God with what he has given us. You see, the heart bent inward is not a suitable place for the gospel to take root. This idea of the heart bent inward, it actually comes from Martin Luther and John Calvin. It's a Latin phrase, homo incurvatus in se, and it means the heart bent in on itself. You see, at the fall, the heart was like a love pump, and prior to sin entering the world, you and I were always supposed to have this heart that was a love pump that was supposed to be poured out onto God, who is the object of our love, and then we receive the perfect love of God back onto us. This is the beauty of reciprocity, of love, and yet when the fall comes, the fall doesn't turn the love pump off. The fall knocks the love pump off kilter. The brilliant philosopher and theologian James K. Smith refers to it that way. And he says, instead the love pump, it begins to pour out love on ourselves. And we opt for things like unforgiveness and hatred and rage and vengeance and pride and selfish ambition and vain conceit and worldly pleasures, because in the end, we have a deep-rooted distrust that God has any good for us. And so if God won't do for us, we're going to have to do for ourselves. This is the viral TikTok reel that goes, "You do you, boo." It is. What makes you happy? What gives you pleasure? You see, you have to do for yourself because you can't trust anybody else to do for you. So you have got to achieve. You got to pull yourself up by the bootstraps. Have any of you ever tried to pull yourself up by the bootstraps? It's ridiculous. We have to be careful to look at the condition of the heart, because a heart that is closed, that is stony and hard, will not be receptive to the goodness of the gospel. Jesus gives a second condition. It's shallow soil, and he talks about it in terms of the rocky ground. And imagine this, that you've got almost like rocky terrain, and it kind of overlaps with itself. And some of the seed finds itself in almost like this perfect little protected spot. But the problem is underneath it is rock, and it's got a little perch. And in the Judean summer, when the sun came out, it would create these warm pockets. And it's actually kind of brilliant because the seeds, when they fall into these little warmth pockets, it's almost like the perfect incubator. And so in that moment, the seed has the opportunity to flourish real quick and real fast. And on the outside, it's like, oh my gosh, look at this thing. It took root, like it's doing really well. But the problem is the sun comes up. And when the sun comes up, what once flourished now is destroyed. What is Jesus talking about here? He's talking about a kind of reception of the gospel that the root never goes deep, but it's based off of emotion and hype. It's a kind of acceptance of the gospel that comes with our own conditions. Have you ever had silent conditions that you've communicated with God? Let's be honest. Like God, okay, listen, I will do all the right things. I will live a moral and upright life. I'll be faithful to my wife. I'll be faithful to my kids. I just need you to pull your weight, God. Right? Make sure my life is okay. My finances are well. Make sure my kids don't get sick. Like God, I just need you to pull your weight. And this is the unsaid condition of our relationship with God. And then the kids go sideways. The marriage is dysfunctional. There's hardship. The job is lost. And we go, well, you didn't live up to your end. I'm done. I'm out. Friends, I want you to know this. The Christian life cannot be lived and endured through emotion and hype. That's good. It will not sustain you. And Jesus has a deep concern for that seed that is almost placed in that perfect position to flourish real fast, but at the first sign of real despair, it falters and fails. This is why James says in James 1, 9 through 11, hey, believers, those of you in humble circumstances, go ahead and take pride in your highly position. He's talking about your identity in Christ. But then he says this, but the rich, those who are wealthy, man, you take pride in your humble status, since they will all pass away like a wildflower. For the sun rises with scorching heat and withers the plant. Its blossom and falls, and its beauty is destroyed. In the same way, the rich will fade away even while they go about their business. And then here's the last one, and I want you to notice the progression of what's happened with the seed in the soil. We started first with the path, and when the seed falls on the path, it doesn't even get to take root or flourish. It just gets snatched away by the enemy. But then we talked about the rocky ground, the shallow ground, and here the seed actually gets in, and it can be planted, and it takes form, but the roots don't go deep. In the last one, the progression grows, so you have no growth, you have some growth, and then in this one, you have a seed that comes up, but while it comes up, there's also thorns and weeds and thistles that come up with it. We have to be careful here, because just hearing the gospel will not sustain. We have to believe the gospel, and we have to live a life of dependence on the good news of King Jesus. Remember that curry plant I was talking about? The one that flourished and was all great and amazing? At one point I was amazed because this curry plant, it just grew, and then right next to it was like another shoot that came up. And I'm thinking, this is a miraculous curry plant. Like my grandmother has done something. She must have prayed over this specific one, because now this thing is multiplying. And I'm watching it, and it's growing up, and now there's 2 curry plants, and it's got leaves, and it's pouring out leaves, and I'm like, this is unbelievable. And so we take the curry plants, and you harvest the curry plants, and you use it in your chicken curry or whatever you're trying to make, and that's what we're doing. I'm using both stocks of both things. And finally, I think I need to tell my Uncle Calvin that he gave me a miraculous curry plant. This is amazing. And I texted him a picture, and I sent it to him. And I said, Kali Mama, Uncle Calvin, hey, did you know that this is a miraculous curry plant? It has multiplied. And he said, please tell me you did not cook with those leaves. And I said, yes, I did, and it tasted delicious. He said, Joey, that's not a curry plant. That's a weed. I know. You know what's so wild about that weed? It looked just like the real thing. It looked just like the real thing. Same stock, same color, same looking leaves, but it was a weed. And the thing about this weed is, as I was watering and flourishing and nourishing, that weed was sucking the nutrients out of the real thing. I want us to be deeply aware of good things that become ultimate things in our lives that will always turn into idolatrous things. This is the great deception of the human life. The enemy loves to use good and neutral things, things of God's good creation, to entrench themselves into our heart into such a way that these things become ultimate things. And when anything becomes an ultimate thing that displaces King Jesus from his rightful place in our hearts, they always become idolatrous things. The deception is to disconnect you from the Creator and to find your deepest pleasures in the created. This is what happens with the seed. It's growing. It's doing well. But there are thorns and thistles and weeds that over time choke out the goodness of the gospel. And then we get to the last one. Really fascinating that when Jesus explains the good soil in Matthew 13:23 later on, he says the seed falling on good soil yields 160 or 30 times what was sown. I was doing a little bit of research on this, and the agricultural yields of this time period in Italy or Sicily would have been 5 to 6 times. Like, that's a great yield. In Egypt, because of the Nile River and the irrigation system, it was up to 7 times, which is like epic. And in Palestine, in the different Judean area, anywhere between 7.5 to 10 times the yield. When Jesus says 30 to 100 times, it's like one of you hitting jackpot on the lottery. This is insane. Some scholars are like, this would be unreasonable. To which I would say, and that's the point. That's the point. On the one hand, you have the utter devastation of seed that falls on ground that doesn't take root. But then on the other hand, you have the faithfulness of God, where seed that falls in good soil will far outpace and outproduce even what was lost. I can't help but think about the soil of the hearts that are represented right here. The yield that can come from the beauty of the gospel proclaimed through your words and with your works. And this is why, on the one hand, yes, we proclaim the gospel. We don't have to worry about the condition of somebody else's heart. That's God's responsibility. We proclaim the truth of King Jesus, and simultaneously, we have a deep awareness of the condition of our heart. So I ask you this question: what is the condition of the soil of your heart? You see, a heart that is not cultivated in humility will be corrupted by pride. A heart that is not cultivated in humility will be corrupted by pride. And I want you to understand what humility is and what it is not. Humility is about rightly knowing who you are in light of who God is. It's a 3-part movement. You know God so you can know yourself, which powerfully equips you to rightly relate to other image bearers of God. It is not you being walked all over. It's not you thinking less of yourself. It's you thinking rightly of yourself. You think of yourself the way that God thinks about you. You see, pride, it promises you clarity, but only creates chaos in your life. Pride is going to make you the pinnacle of everything. And pride will lead you to treat other people like pawns on a chessboard, who you're willing to sacrifice as long as you get what you want. You see, when Jesus gives us this parable, he's giving us 2 things: a call and a caution. Here's the call: proclaim the good news of King Jesus. Here's the caution: what's the condition of your heart? How are you receiving the gospel? What is the condition of your soil? So how do we ensure that the soil is good? Actually, Paul talks about in Galatians chapter 5. He gives us 3 roles of proximity, and it all deals with dependence on the Holy Spirit. Here's what it is. Galatians 5:16, walk by the Spirit. Galatians 5:18, be led by the Spirit. Galatians 5:25, keep in step with the Spirit so that you and I might live by the power of the Spirit of God. When my kids were younger, my daughter MJ is just getting to the end of this. But I remember walking in Target, and as I would walk, she would do this thing where she tried to gauge my step with her step. And she tried to get it where she would step at the exact same time that I stepped. She just always wants to be near where dad is, like near dad's proximity, even to the point where sometimes she almost like outpaces or underpaces, but she's just like adamant about where's dad going? I want to go there. I think this is what is being described by our dependence on the Holy Spirit. You see, the Spirit of God knows the condition of our heart. The Spirit of God will expose the pridefulness of our heart. The Spirit of God will expose unforgiveness and anger and rage and vengeance. And so the closer we are to the Spirit of God, the more our hearts can be cultivated in a way that is prepared for the soil of the gospel to flourish. Would you keep in step with the Spirit? Where the Spirit goes, you're like, yes, I'm going to go. But where the Spirit slows down, you're going to slow down too. Where the Spirit gives you a yes, you walk through. But when the Spirit says no, in obedience, you withdraw. Would you walk by the Spirit, be led by the Spirit, and keep in step with the Spirit? It's possible. This is a theological journey that I've come on, and after all of these years of ministry, I can't deny this because I've seen it up close and personal. Just because you start in the power of the Spirit doesn't mean you won't end up in the vicious vice grips of the flesh. You might be saved, but your witness might be so compromised. What a tragedy. Don't end in the flesh. When Jesus gives us this parable of the sower and the seed, he gives us a call and he gives us a caution. One of the things that I love about this parable is the acknowledgement of the presence of resistance and pain and suffering. Yes, there's a real enemy. Yes, there's emotion and hype. Yes, there are good things that out of order will become disruptive things for us. The issue isn't the presence of these things. The issue is our relationship with them. I remember reading a story, and I'm a nerd, and so I read like scientific papers. And there was this paper from a group of scientists that wanted to create the perfect habitation for trees. The perfect habitation for trees. And so they created and bought this massive farmland, and they created a biosphere. And inside of that biosphere, they planted a whole bunch of trees, and they created the perfect conditions for the flourishing and the growth of these trees. And boy, did these trees flourish. They had the right amount of sun and the right amount of rain. I mean, they had everything it needed. These things were growing. And then, to the dismay of the scientists, at one point, the trees were getting to the point where they were about to outgrow and push into the biosphere that had protected them this entire time. And so they're like, okay, great, now is the time. We have set up the trees for such success. They have grown up perfectly in the biosphere. Now we can remove the biosphere, and they're going to be set. Do you know what happened when they removed the biosphere from the trees? A gust of wind came, and that gust of wind knocked the trees all over. You see, the scientists, when they evaluated what went wrong, there was one variable they forgot to play into, and the variable was the resistance that's caused by wind. So what ends up happening is the roots went vertical. They spread far and wide, and in fact, the roots were interconnected with each other, all the other trees. But the problem was, when the wind came and the one came down, guess what happened to all the rest of them? They all came tumbling down as well. In stark contrast to this are the trees that you find in Yosemite or the redwoods. You see, these trees, their roots, they go deep down, and they're interconnected with each other. What Jesus wants for us in this parable is a reminder of our role and responsibility, the call and the caution. And the call is proclaim the gospel, but the caution is tend to the soil of your heart so that your roots would go deeper into the life of Christ. Because that is the safest place for you to grow and flourish. It is a promise not in the absence of all of the hard and hurtful of life. It is the promise of the presence of King Jesus in the midst of all of it. And I want you to know that that is one of the most compelling stories that you can proclaim to a world that is desperate to know that King Jesus is exactly who he said he was.
You're listening to audio from Home Church Roswell, located in Roswell, Georgia. For more information about this ministry or to give to this ministry, please visit homechurchroswell.com.